My name is Harold, and I'm 58 years old. This past Christmas morning started like any other for the last 15 years since my wife passed. I woke up early, made my coffee, and carefully wrapped the gifts I'd spent months preparing for my son Marcus and my grandchildren. I never imagined that walking up to my son's front door with arms full of presents would be the last time I'd ever be welcome in his home. What happened that day changed everything I thought I knew about family love and what it means to be a father. Before we dive into this story that will stay with you long after it ends, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Please hit that like button if you believe family should stick together through thick and thin, and don't forget to subscribe because this journey of heartbreak and healing has lessons we all need to hear. I've been an electrician for 35 years, working with my hands to build a life for my family. When my wife Sarah died of cancer 15 years ago, Marcus was just starting college at Stanford. I remember working double shifts, sometimes skipping meals, just to make sure his tuition was paid on time. Those were the hardest years of my life, but seeing my boy succeed made every sacrifice worth it. Marcus graduated with honors and landed a job as a software engineer in Silicon Valley. Within a few years, he was making more money than I'd ever dreamed of. He met Cynthia at a company party, and they got married 3 years later. She came from money, old money, the kind that comes with expectations and social circles I'd never been part of. But she seemed nice enough at first, always polite when I visited, always asking about my work. When Emma was born 8 years ago, I thought my heart might burst with joy. Then Lucas came along 5 years ago, and I finally understood what people meant when they said being a grandparent was the best job in the world. I'd drive the 45 minutes to their house in the suburbs every other weekend, my pickup truck loaded with tools and wood scraps to make toys for the kids. Emma loved the dollhouses I'd build for her, and Lucas would spend hours playing with the wooden cars I'd carve by hand. For the first few years after the kids were born, everything seemed perfect. Marcus would call me every Sunday evening telling me about his work, the kids' latest achievements, plans for the holidays. When I'd visit, Cynthia would make dinner, and we'd all sit around their big dining room table like a real family. The kids would climb all over me, showing me their artwork from school, begging me to tell them stories about their daddy when he was little. But sometime around 2 years ago, things started to change. The Sunday phone calls became every other week, then once a month. When I'd suggest visiting, Marcus always seemed to have something else going on. Work was busy, the kids had activities, Cynthia wasn't feeling well. There was always something. I started noticing how Cynthia would get this tight smile whenever I'd give the kids advice about anything. When Lucas was afraid of the dark, I suggested leaving a small light on in his room. Cynthia's response was sharp and immediate. She said they were using a different approach recommended by their pediatrician. When Emma asked me to help with a school project about family history, Cynthia quickly redirected her to focus on more recent family achievements. The changes were subtle, but they cut deep. I began to feel like I was walking on eggshells every time I visited. Conversations became stilted, and I could sense an undercurrent of tension that I couldn't quite understand. Marcus seemed caught in the middle, often changing the subject whenever I tried to talk to him alone about what was happening. This Christmas, I decided to make something extra special. I spent 3 months in my garage workshop carefully crafting a Victorian-style dollhouse for Emma. Every tiny piece of furniture was hand-carved, every room painted in soft pastels. I installed miniature LED lights that actually worked, complete with tiny switches Emma could flip on and off. For Lucas, I found a complex Lego robotics set that cost me more than I'd usually spend, but I wanted to see his face light up when he opened it. For Marcus, I wrapped up my father's vintage Seiko watch, the one my dad had given me when I graduated high school. It was the most valuable thing I owned, not in money, but in meaning. I hoped it would remind him of the generations of hard-working men who'd come before him, who'd sacrificed everything for their families. The night before Christmas, I loaded everything carefully into my truck. I was excited in a way I hadn't been in months. Maybe these gifts would bridge whatever gap had formed between us. Maybe Christmas morning would bring back the closeness we used to share. I woke up at 5 in the morning on Christmas Day, too excited to sleep. The drive to Marcus's house usually took about 45 minutes, but I left early because I wanted to be there when the kids woke up. I imagined Emma and Lucas running downstairs in their pajamas, finding the presents from Grandpa Harold under the tree, their faces glowing with joy. But when I pulled into their driveway, something felt different immediately. There were at least 6 cars parked on the street that I didn't recognize. Expensive cars. A Mercedes, 2 BMWs, and what looked like a Tesla. Through the large front windows, I could see people moving around inside, hear the sound of laughter and conversation. I sat in my truck for a moment, gathering my courage. Maybe they were having a Christmas morning gathering with Cynthia's family. That would be fine. I just wanted to drop off the gifts and spend a little time with my grandchildren. When I rang the doorbell, carrying the carefully wrapped presents, it took several minutes for someone to answer. When Marcus finally opened the door, his expression wasn't the welcoming smile I'd hoped for. Instead, he looked almost annoyed, like I was interrupting something important. "Dad," he said, not moving aside to let me in. "I didn't know you were coming so early. I wanted to be here when the kids opened their presents," I explained, shifting the heavy dollhouse in my arms. "You know how excited they get on Christmas morning." Marcus hesitated, glancing back into the house where I could hear more laughter and the clinking of glasses. "Well, we have some guests over. Cynthia's family flew in from Connecticut. It's kind of a full house right now." The way he said it made my stomach drop. Like I wasn't family. Like I was some neighbor dropping by uninvited. "I won't stay long," I promised. "I just want to see Emma and Lucas open their gifts." After what felt like an eternity, Marcus stepped aside reluctantly. "Okay, but just for a few minutes. Everyone's in the middle of opening presents." Walking into that house felt like entering a different world. The living room was filled with well-dressed people I'd never met, all holding champagne glasses and speaking in the kind of refined voices you hear in old movies. The Christmas tree was enormous, surrounded by piles of expensive-looking gifts with perfect ribbon work and professional wrapping. Nobody looked up when I entered. Nobody introduced themselves or welcomed me. I might as well have been invisible. Cynthia appeared from the kitchen wearing an elegant red dress that probably cost more than I made in a week. Her smile was polite but cold, the kind you give to strangers. "Harold," she said, her voice artificially bright. "What a surprise. We weren't expecting you." "I called last week and left a message about Christmas morning," I replied, though I suddenly wondered if Marcus had actually received that message. "Oh well, as you can see, we have quite a crowd today." She gestured toward her family members, none of whom had acknowledged my presence. "We're just finishing up our gift exchange." That's when Emma came running over, her face lighting up when she saw me. "Grandpa Harold, you came? Did you bring presents?" Before I could answer, Cynthia was steering Emma away. "Sweetheart, come back to the tree. Uncle Richard is about to open his gift." The dismissal was clear, but I tried to stay positive. Lucas spotted me and waved from across the room, but when he started to come over, one of Cynthia's relatives intercepted him, engaging him in conversation about some toy he'd just opened. I stood there holding my gifts, feeling more and more like an intruder in my own son's home. The conversation flowed around me without including me. When someone did glance in my direction, it was with barely concealed curiosity, like they were wondering who the old man in the cheap Christmas sweater was. Marcus appeared at my side, his discomfort obvious. "Dad, maybe this isn't the best time. With all the family here, things are kind of hectic." "I understand," I said, though I really didn't. "I'll just give the kids their presents and go." But even that simple request seemed to create tension. Marcus looked around nervously, then back at me. "Actually, could we step outside for a minute? I need to talk to you." The way he said it sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the December weather. We walked out to the back patio, leaving the warmth and laughter of the house behind. Marcus closed the sliding door firmly, cutting off the sounds of his family's celebration. The contrast was stark and painful. "Dad, we need to talk," Marcus began, not meeting my eyes. "What's wrong, son?" I asked, though part of me was afraid to hear the answer. Marcus ran his hand through his hair, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. "I've been thinking a lot lately about boundaries. About what's healthy for my family." "Boundaries?" The word felt foreign, coming from my son's mouth. "Yes. I think we need to establish some clearer expectations about your role in our lives." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "My role, Marcus, I'm your father. I'm Emma and Lucas's grandfather." "I know that, Dad. But Cynthia and I feel like sometimes you're too involved in our family decisions. You give your opinion about everything from how we discipline the kids to what activities they should be in." I was genuinely confused. "I don't give opinions, son. I just try to help when you ask." "But that's just it. We don't always ask and you still offer advice. It makes Cynthia feel like we're not capable of raising our own children." And the accusation stung because it was so unfair. When have I ever said you weren't capable? I'm proud of the parents you and Cynthia are. Marcus finally looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes was worse than anger. It was embarrassment. "Dad, you have to understand. Cynthia comes from a different background than us. Her family has certain expectations." "What kind of expectations?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Look, you're a good man and you did your best raising me. But Cynthia's friends, her family, they don't understand our situation." "What situation, Marcus?" "The economic differences, Dad. The fact that you still drive that old pickup truck, that you wear the same clothes you've had for 10 years. When you come to Emma's school events in your work clothes, or when you tell stories about growing up poor, it reflects on all of us." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own son was ashamed of me. Ashamed of the man who'd worked 3 jobs to put him through college. Ashamed of the grandfather who'd spent months crafting toys for his children with his own hands. "Marcus, are you saying you don't want me around because I embarrass you?" "It's not that simple, Dad. But yes, we think it would be better if you weren't so visible in our lives, especially around Cynthia's family and our social circle." The words hit me like physical blows. Visible son. I'm not some stranger. I'm your father. "I know what you sacrificed for me," Marcus said, his voice getting harder. "But I never asked you to do that. Those were your choices, your decisions. I can't spend the rest of my life feeling guilty about my success because it makes you uncomfortable." "I'm not uncomfortable with your success. I'm proud of you." "Are you?" "Because every time you come here, you make comments about how different our life is from how you raised me. You tell the kids stories about making do with less, about the value of hard work over money. It undermines what Cynthia and I are trying to teach them." I realized then that this conversation had been planned. These weren't spontaneous thoughts. Someone had been filling my son's head with these ideas, turning my love into something toxic. "Marcus, who's been saying these things to you?" Before he could answer, the patio door slid open and Cynthia stepped out. She was no longer bothering to hide her hostile expression. "Harold, I think we need to have an honest conversation," she said, her voice sharp as ice. Cynthia closed the patio door behind her with deliberate force, and suddenly I felt like I was facing a firing squad. The warmth of the Christmas celebration inside seemed a million miles away. "Harold," Cynthia began, her voice carrying an authority I'd never heard from her before. "I'm going to be direct with you because clearly subtle hints haven't worked." My heart was pounding, but I tried to stay calm. "What hints, Cynthia?" "The hints that your constant involvement in our family is inappropriate. That your comments about money and your stories about struggling financially are confusing our children. That your presence at social events makes things uncomfortable for everyone." I looked at Marcus, hoping he would defend me, but he was staring at the ground. "I've never made anyone uncomfortable," I said. "I just want to be part of my grandchildren's lives." "But that's exactly the problem," Cynthia continued, stepping closer. "You want to be part of their lives on your terms, with your values, your lower-class perspective on everything. You're undermining the life Marcus and I have built." "Lower class." The words came out as a whisper. "Yes, Harold. Lower class. You show up to my daughter's private school events in clothes that look like you just got off a construction site. You tell my children that expensive toys aren't as good as homemade ones. You give them values that directly contradict what Marcus and I are trying to teach them." Each word was like a knife, but she wasn't finished. "My children are going to grow up in a different world than the one you know. They're going to attend the best schools, associate with the best families, have opportunities that you can't even imagine. And frankly, having a grandfather who represents everything we're trying to move away from is not helpful." I turned to Marcus, desperate for him to say something, anything, to defend me. "Son, do you agree with this?" Marcus finally looked up, and his eyes were cold in a way I'd never seen before. "Dad, Cynthia is right. We're trying to build something here, and every time you come around, it's like you're pulling us backward." "Pulling you backward, Marcus, everything I did was to move you forward. Every sacrifice I made was so you could have the opportunities I never had." "But don't you see," Cynthia interjected, "those sacrifices, that martyrdom complex of yours, it's toxic. It makes Marcus feel guilty for succeeding. It makes our children think there's something wrong with having nice things or living well. I never said there was anything wrong with success. You don't have to say it, Harold. It's in every look you give when you see our house, our cars, the clothes we wear. It's in every story you tell about the good old days when people knew the value of hard work. You're passive-aggressive about our lifestyle, and it's damaging our children." I felt like I was drowning. All I've ever wanted was to be a good father and grandfather. "Then prove it," Marcus said suddenly, his voice harder than I'd ever heard it. "Prove it by stepping back, by letting us raise our children without your constant interference." "Interference, spending time with my grandchildren, is interference." "Yes," Cynthia said bluntly. "When that time comes with judgment, with outdated values, with guilt trips about money and class differences, then, yes, it's interference." I looked between them, trying to understand how we'd gotten to this point. "What do you want from me?" "We want you to respect our boundaries," Marcus said. "We want you to stop dropping by unannounced. Stop giving the kids gifts that make them question why their parents buy them different things. Stop telling them stories that make them feel bad about the life we've given them. And if I don't..." The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Cynthia spoke. "Then we'll have to limit your access to our children, for their own good." The threat hung in the air between us like a blade. I realized then that this wasn't a conversation. It was an ultimatum. They'd already made their decision about my place in their lives. "I think we should go back inside," Marcus said abruptly. "The family is probably wondering where we are." As we walked toward the door, I caught sight of Emma's face pressed against the window. She waved at me and I waved back, not knowing it might be the last time I'd see that innocent joy directed at me. The next few hours would prove me right. Walking back into that house felt like entering a courtroom where I'd already been found guilty. The laughter and conversation continued around me, but now I understood that I wasn't just unwelcome, I was actively resented. Every glance from Cynthia's family members felt like judgment, every whispered conversation like a conspiracy against my presence. I tried to focus on the children, thinking that maybe if I could just give them their gifts and see their happiness, I could salvage something from this nightmare. Emma ran to me the moment I walked through the door. "Grandpa Harold, you look sad. Are you okay?" Before I could answer, Cynthia was there, gently but firmly pulling Emma away. "Grandpa Harold is fine, sweetheart. Come help Mommy in the kitchen." Lucas approached more cautiously, sensing the tension in the room. "Did you bring us presents, Grandpa?" I knelt down to his level, forcing a smile. "I did, buddy. Would you like to see them?" But before I could reach for the gifts I'd set by the door, Marcus intervened. "Dad, maybe we should wait until later to do the gift exchange. We're in the middle of something here." "Please, Marcus. Just let me give them their presents. Then I'll go." The desperation in my voice must have been obvious, because several of Cynthia's relatives turned to watch our exchange. I could feel their curious stares, their whispered speculation about the family drama unfolding before them. Cynthia's mother, an elegant woman in her 70s, approached with the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. "Harold, isn't it? I'm Margaret, Cynthia's mother. I've heard so much about you." The way she said it made it clear that what she'd heard wasn't positive. "It's nice to meet you, Mrs. I began, but she was already turning away, dismissing me as effectively as if I were a servant who'd spoken out of turn. That's when I noticed that they were all watching me. Not openly, but with the kind of sideways glances people give when they're observing something unpleasant, but fascinating. I realized I was the entertainment, the poor relation, who didn't know his place. "Marcus," I said quietly, "I'm going to get the gifts from my truck. I'll just give them to the kids and leave." "Actually, Dad," Marcus said, and something in his tone made my blood run cold. "I think we need to address this situation properly, in front of everyone." "What situation?" "The situation where you refuse to respect our boundaries, where you continue to insert yourself into our lives despite clear signals that your behavior is inappropriate." I couldn't believe he was doing this in front of strangers. "Marcus, please, can we discuss this privately?" "No, Dad. I'm tired of private discussions that go nowhere. I'm tired of pretending everything is fine when it's not." The room had gone completely quiet now. Even the children had stopped playing and were watching with wide, confused eyes. Marcus walked to the front door and, to my complete shock, turned the deadbolt lock. "Nobody leaves until we settle this once and for all," he announced to the room. My mouth went dry. "Son, what are you doing?" "I'm doing what I should have done months ago. I'm telling the truth." He turned to face me, but he was also addressing everyone in the room. "Everyone here should know the situation we've been dealing with. My father refuses to accept that he's no longer the center of our family. He continues to interfere with our parenting, to undermine our values, to make our children feel conflicted about the life we've provided for them." I felt like I was having a heart attack. "Marcus, that's not true." "Isn't it, Dad? When was the last time you visited without criticizing something?" When was the last time you didn't make some comment about how different things are from when I was growing up? I never criticized anything. I just try to share my experiences. Your experiences about being poor, about struggling, about making do with less. Do you have any idea how that makes my children feel about their comfortable life? Cynthia stepped forward, clearly emboldened by having an audience. Harold has been trying to sabotage our family for 2 years now. He resents our success, our lifestyle, our social position. Instead of being happy for his son, he's bitter and jealous. That's not true, I said, my voice cracking with emotion. Then explain the constant comments about money, Marcus demanded. Explain why you tell my children that homemade gifts are more meaningful than store-bought ones. Explain why you show up to school events dressed like a laborer when you know it embarrasses us. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. I dress like a laborer because I am a laborer. I'm not ashamed of honest work. Well, we are, Cynthia said bluntly. We're ashamed of having to explain to our friends and colleagues why my father-in-law looks like he just crawled out from under a car. The cruelty of her words left me speechless. I looked around the room, hoping anyone would speak up in my defense. But they were all watching with the fascination of people observing a car accident. Dad. Marcus continued, his voice getting stronger with each word. I've made a decision. For the good of my family, for the emotional health of my children, I need you to step back from our lives. Step back how much? Completely. The word hit me like a gunshot. Completely. Yes, I don't want you visiting anymore. I don't want you calling constantly. I don't want you sending gifts that come with strings attached and guilt trips about how much you sacrificed for me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Marcus, please, don't do this. It's already done, Dad. You are no longer welcome in this house. You are no longer part of this family. The words, "You are no longer part of this family," echoed in my head like a death sentence. I stood there, surrounded by strangers in my son's living room, feeling like the world was collapsing around me. Marcus, I whispered, my voice barely audible. You don't mean that. I do mean it, Dad. I've never meant anything more in my life. Emma started crying. Not the dramatic crying of a child who doesn't get her way, but the confused, heartbroken crying of someone who doesn't understand why the adults she loves are hurting each other. Why is Grandpa Harold crying? She asked through her tears. Why is Daddy being mean to him? Cynthia immediately went to Emma, pulling her close. Daddy's not being mean, sweetheart. Sometimes adults have to make difficult decisions to protect their families. But Grandpa Harold is family, Emma protested. No, baby. Cynthia said, her voice gentle but firm. Grandpa Harold is Daddy's father, but he's not our family anymore. Sometimes people have to go away when they can't follow the rules. I watched my granddaughter's face crumple with confusion and pain, and something inside me broke. Lucas had retreated behind the couch, his 5-year-old mind unable to process what was happening. Please, I begged Marcus, not caring anymore who was watching. Don't do this to them. They love me. They'll get over it, Marcus said coldly. Children are resilient. They'll be better off without the confusion you bring to their lives. Cynthia's mother spoke up, then her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Marcus, I think you're handling this very well. Sometimes you have to cut toxic people out of your life, even if they're family. Especially if they're family. Her words gave Marcus the validation he needed. His posture straightened, and his resolve seemed to strengthen. Dad, I need you to leave now. And I need you to understand that this isn't a temporary situation. This is permanent. I don't want you to call. I don't want you to visit. I don't want you to try to contact the children through school or through neighbors. It's over." I looked around the room one more time, desperate for anyone to show a shred of compassion. But they were all aligned against me. Even the people who didn't know me had chosen their side based on nothing more than appearances and assumptions. "What about Emma and Lucas?" I asked. "What will you tell them about why their grandfather disappeared from their lives?" "We'll tell them the truth," Cynthia said. "That you couldn't respect our family's boundaries, and that sometimes people have to face consequences for their actions." "And what about the dollhouse?" I gestured toward the carefully wrapped gift that represented months of loving labor. "What about the watch I brought for you, Marcus? The one that belonged to your grandfather? Keep your gifts, Dad. We don't want them. They come with too many strings attached." The rejection of the dollhouse hurt almost as much as everything else. I had imagined Emma's face lighting up when she saw the tiny rooms, the working lights, the miniature furniture I'd carved with my own hands. Now it would go back to my garage, a monument to my foolishness, in believing that love could overcome prejudice and social ambition. Marcus walked to the front door and unlocked it, holding it open, like he was showing out an unwelcome salesman. "Goodbye, Dad." I walked toward the door on unsteady legs, still carrying the gifts that no one wanted. As I reached the threshold, I turned back one more time, hoping against hope that this was all some terrible misunderstanding that could still be fixed. "Marcus, I love you. I love Emma and Lucas. Nothing will ever change that." "I know, Dad, but love isn't enough. Sometimes you have to choose between what you want and what's best for your family. I'm choosing what's best for my family." I stepped out into the cold Christmas morning, hearing the door close behind me with a finality that echoed through my entire being. Through the window, I could see the Christmas celebration resuming as if nothing had happened. Cynthia's family gathering around the tree, laughing and talking, while Emma continued to cry and Lucas remained hidden behind the furniture. As I loaded the rejected gifts back into my truck, I caught sight of Emma pressing her face against the window, her small hand flat against the glass. She was still crying, still confused about why her grandfather was leaving on Christmas Day. I drove away from that house knowing that my life as I had known it was over. The family I had lived for, sacrificed for, and loved unconditionally had just erased me from their existence as easily as deleting a phone number. The 45-minute drive home felt like hours. I kept thinking about Emma's face, about Lucas hiding behind the couch, about the cold finality in Marcus's voice when he said, I was no longer part of the family. When I got home to my small house, I sat in my truck in the driveway for a long time, unable to face the emptiness waiting for me inside. The carefully wrapped gifts sat in the passenger seat, like accusations reminders of my naivety in believing that handmade love could compete with social status and material success. That night, I didn't eat. I didn't watch television. I just sat in my recliner staring at the family photos on the side table, trying to understand how everything I thought I knew about love and family could be so wrong. The first few days after Christmas passed in a blur of numbness and denial. I kept expecting the phone to ring, kept thinking Marcus would call to apologize, to tell me it had all been a misunderstanding brought on by holiday stress and too much wine. The phone never rang. By New Year's Eve, I hadn't eaten a proper meal in a week. I'd lost 12 pounds and probably hadn't slept more than 3 hours at a stretch. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emma's confused face pressed against that window, heard Lucas's frightened whimper when the adults started yelling. My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, started knocking on my door on January 2nd. She was a widow in her 70s who'd lived next door for 20 years, and she'd watched Marcus grow up. She knew something was wrong when she hadn't seen me outside in over a week. "Harold, honey, you look terrible," she said when I finally answered the door. "What happened?" I tried to explain, but the words came out broken and confused. She listened without judgment, occasionally nodding or making sympathetic sounds. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Harold, I need to tell you something, and you're not going to like it." "What?" "I saw Cynthia at the grocery store 2 days ago. She was talking to Janet Morrison from down the street. She said the family had decided to cut ties with a toxic relative who was disrupting their children's emotional development." The words hit me like cold water. She said I was toxic. She said a lot more than that, honey. She said you'd been trying to undermine their parenting, that you were resentful of their success, that you'd been inappropriate with the children. Inappropriate? The accusation was so shocking, I could barely process it. "I don't believe a word of it, Harold. I've watched you with those babies since they were born." But she's already started spreading her version of what happened. I realized then that not only had I lost my family, but Cynthia was systematically destroying my reputation in the community. Any chance I might have had to reconnect with Marcus or the children was being eliminated through a campaign of character assassination. "Mrs. Patterson, I don't know what to do." "Honey, you need to eat something first. Then you need to decide whether you're going to let them destroy you or whether you're going to fight back. Fight back how I can't compete with their money or their social connections. No, but you can compete with character and dignity. You can show this community who Harold Williams really is, instead of letting that woman define you." Over the next few weeks, Mrs. Patterson became my lifeline. She brought me meals, sat with me during the worst moments of grief, and slowly helped me understand that I had been the victim of something called parental alienation. She'd seen it happen to other grandparents, she told me. It was more common than people realized. "It's a form of emotional abuse, Harold. They turn the child against the targeted parent by making them believe that person is harmful or toxic. Your son didn't come up with those ideas on his own." She helped me research the phenomenon online, and I was shocked to discover how many other parents and grandparents were going through similar experiences. There were support groups, legal resources, and most importantly, hope for eventual reconciliation. "The key," she explained, "is to not react the way they expect you to. They want you to become bitter and angry to prove their point that you're toxic. Instead, you need to become the best version of yourself." How do I do that when I feel like dying? You start by taking care of yourself. Then you start building a life that shows everyone, including Marcus, who you really are. Slowly, very slowly, I began to follow her advice. I started eating again, sleeping better, taking walks around the neighborhood. I began to think about what I wanted the rest of my life to look like instead of just mourning what I'd lost. By March, I was ready to take the first real step toward rebuilding my life. Spring brought with it a determination I hadn't felt in months. Instead of wallowing in self-pity, I decided to channel my pain into something productive. If Marcus and Cynthia wanted to paint me as a toxic, unsuccessful old man, I would prove them wrong in the most public way possible. I started Harold's Home Electrical Services, specializing in electrical work for senior citizens and single mothers. My years of experience, combined with my reputation for honesty and fair pricing, quickly made me the most sought-after electrician in town. Word spread through the community about the grandpa who would rewire your kitchen for half what the big companies charged, who would stay to teach you how to reset your circuit breakers, who treated every customer like family. But electrical work was just the beginning. I volunteered at Jefferson Elementary School's after-school program, teaching kids how to build simple wooden toys and crafts. The program director, Mrs. Chen, welcomed me with open arms. She said they desperately needed male role models, especially ones with practical skills. Mr. Harold, as the kids called me, became a fixture at the school. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, you could find me in the art room with 15 or 20 children, showing them how to sand wood, how to use simple tools safely, how to create something beautiful with their own hands. The children loved the projects, but more than that, they loved the attention. Many of them came from broken homes or families where both parents worked multiple jobs. Having a patient grandfather figure who listened to their stories and praised their efforts filled a void they didn't even know they had. Emma's school was in a different district, but word travels in small communities. I knew that eventually someone would mention the wonderful volunteer grandpa at Jefferson Elementary to someone who knew Marcus's family. I also started posting pictures on social media, something I'd never done much of before. But now I carefully documented my new life. Photos of the kids at school proudly holding up their wooden cars and painted birdhouses. Pictures of satisfied customers, elderly ladies who wrote thank you notes praising my work and kindness. Images from community events where I was increasingly being recognized as someone who made a difference. Never once did I mention Marcus, Cynthia, or the grandchildren I'd lost. My posts were purely positive, focused on the joy I found in helping others and the satisfaction of meaningful work. But anyone who saw them would understand that Harold Williams was not the bitter, toxic person Cynthia had described. By summer, I had been featured in the local newspaper's Community Heroes column. The article described my volunteer work with children and my affordable services for seniors. It included quotes from parents praising my patience and skill, and from elderly customers who called me a godsend. The article was shared hundreds of times on social media. Old friends from work, neighbors, former customers, all commenting about what a good man I was and how lucky the community was to have me. I knew Marcus would see it eventually. In a town this size, everyone sees everything sooner or later. The breakthrough came in August. Mrs. Chen called me at home, which was unusual because we typically only spoke at school. "Harold, I need to tell you something, but I want your permission first." "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. But I got a call today from a woman asking about you. She said she was doing research for a family member who was considering volunteer work." My heart started pounding. What kind of questions did she ask? She wanted to know how long you'd been volunteering, whether you'd ever had any problems with children or parents, whether there had been any complaints about your behavior. I knew immediately it was someone connected to Marcus's family. "What did you tell her?" "I told her the truth, Harold. That you're one of the most beloved volunteers we've ever had. That parents specifically request you for their children. That in 2 years of working with hundreds of kids, we've never had a single complaint. In fact, we've had parents offer to pay extra just to ensure their children get into your sessions." "Did she give you a name?" "She said her name was Margaret, and she was calling from Connecticut." Cynthia's mother. They were checking up on me, trying to find evidence to support their narrative about my character. Instead, they were discovering that the community saw me very differently than they did. This gave me an idea that would eventually change everything. I started being more intentional about my public presence. I joined the Rotary Club, where my volunteer work and business success made me a natural fit. I was elected to the school board, where my practical experience and genuine care for children's welfare earned respect from parents and educators alike. Most importantly, I started mentoring other fathers and grandfathers who were struggling with family relationships. The support group Mrs. Patterson had helped me find online had taught me that I wasn't alone in my experience, and I discovered that helping others navigate similar situations gave my own pain purpose. By Christmas of that first year, exactly 12 months after the worst day of my life, I had become one of the most respected men in our community. not through wealth or status, but through service and character. And I knew that eventually Marcus would have to reckon with the difference between who his wife said I was and who I actually was. The turning point came on a rainy Thursday evening in October, almost 2 years after that devastating Christmas morning. I was at Jefferson Elementary, helping clean up after our weekly woodworking session, when Mrs. Chen approached me with an unusual expression on her face. "Harold, there's someone here to see you." I looked toward the classroom door and saw a man I didn't recognize. He was well-dressed, probably in his 30s, with the kind of nervous energy that suggested he had something important to say. "Mr. Williams, my name is David Chen, Mrs. Chen's nephew. I work at Pinnacle Software in Silicon Valley." The name sounded familiar, but I couldn't place it immediately. "I know your son, Marcus Williams. We're not close friends, but we work in the same building, see each other at company events." My heart started pounding, but I tried to keep my expression neutral. "I've been following your work in the community, and I have to ask you something directly. Are you the same Harold Williams that Marcus claims abandoned his family?" The question hit me like a physical blow. Abandoned his family. That's the story he tells at work when people ask about his father. He says you walked out on them, that you were abusive and unstable, that they had to cut contact for the safety of the children. I leaned against a desk, feeling dizzy. "He says I abandoned them. Harold," Mrs. Chen interjected gently, "maybe we should sit down." David continued, his voice growing more confident. "The reason I'm here is that what Marcus says about you doesn't match what I've observed in our community. My aunt talks about you constantly. She says you're one of the most dedicated, patient men she's ever worked with. Parents at our church rave about the volunteer work you do. The elderly customers you serve call you a blessing." He paused, studying my face carefully. "So either there are two Harold Williams in this town, or someone is lying about who you really are." I took a deep breath, trying to decide how much to reveal to this stranger. "David, what would you say if I told you that I never abandoned anyone, that I was told I was no longer welcome in my son's life, not the other way around?" "I'd say that matches the Harold Williams I've heard about much better than the story Marcus tells." Mrs. Chen put her hand on my shoulder. "Harold, maybe it's time David knew the whole story." And so for the first time in almost 2 years, I told someone outside my immediate circle exactly what had happened that Christmas morning. David listened without interruption, his expression growing more troubled with each detail. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Mr. Williams, I think you need to know something else. Marcus has been struggling at work. He's become increasingly isolated, defensive, angry. People who used to consider him a friend now avoid him. There are rumors about problems at home." "What kind of problems?" "Marriage problems. His wife is apparently very controlling, very focused on social status. Some people say she's the reason Marcus has changed so much over the past few years." This information should have made me happy, but instead, it just made me sad. I never wanted Marcus to be miserable. I just wanted to be part of his life. "There's something else," David continued. "I've heard that his daughter Emma has been having behavioral problems at school, acting out, asking her teachers about her grandfather, crying when other kids talk about their grandparents." The thought of Emma struggling broke my heart all over again. "David, why are you telling me this?" "Because I think Marcus needs help, and I think you might be the only person who can help him. But more than that, I think those children need their grandfather, and I think you deserve to know the truth about how your son is representing you to the world." That conversation changed everything. David became an unlikely ally, someone who could observe Marcus from a distance and report back on the family's situation. Through him, I learned that the perfect life Marcus and Cynthia had tried to create was slowly falling apart. Cynthia's controlling behavior wasn't limited to me. She had systematically isolated Marcus from most of his old friends, dictated his social interactions, and created an environment where he was constantly walking on eggshells. The man who had once been outgoing and confident had become withdrawn and anxious. More importantly, Emma was clearly suffering from the loss of our relationship. She was now 10 years old enough to understand that something was missing from her life, but too young to understand the adult complexities that had created the situation. "She asks about you constantly," David reported after talking to other parents at Emma's school. "The teachers say she lights up whenever someone mentions grandfathers or talks about extended family. She's clearly grieving a relationship she doesn't understand losing." Armed with this information, I made a decision that would require every ounce of patience and strategic thinking I possessed. I wasn't going to confront Marcus directly or try to force a reconciliation. Instead, I was going to make it impossible for him to maintain the narrative he'd created about me. I was going to become so publicly, undeniably good that even Cynthia would struggle to justify keeping me away from those children. The plan I developed was subtle but comprehensive. I would continue building my reputation in the community, but I would also start creating situations where Marcus would be forced to confront the difference between his story about me and the reality of who I was. It started with the Christmas toy drive. 2 weeks before Christmas, exactly, 2 years after Marcus had locked that door and declared me no longer family, I launched the most ambitious project of my new life. I called it Grandpa Harold's Christmas Workshop, and it was designed to ensure that every child in our county's foster care system would have a handmade wooden toy under the tree. The idea came to me during one of my sleepless nights when I was thinking about Emma and Lucas and wondering what kind of Christmas they were having. I realized that while I couldn't give gifts to my own grandchildren, I could honor their memory by making sure other children experienced the kind of love that goes into a handmade present. I reached out to every volunteer organization, church, and community group I'd worked with over the past 2 years. The response was overwhelming. Within days, I had 47 volunteers signed up to help, including several professional carpenters and woodworkers who donated their time and expertise. We set up shop in the basement of Grace Methodist Church, turning it into a full-scale workshop. Every evening and weekend, you could find us there cutting wood sanding pieces, painting details, and assembling toys. We made rocking horses, dollhouses, toy cars, wooden puzzles, and building blocks. Each toy was unique, crafted with care and attention to detail that you simply couldn't buy in any store. The local newspaper picked up the story, then the regional television stations. Within a month, Grandpa Harold's Christmas Workshop was featured on the state news. The story showed me working with children and adults, teaching them woodworking skills, while we created gifts for kids who had often been forgotten by the world. The feature story included interviews with foster parents, social workers, and children who had received my toys in previous years. A 12-year-old boy named Tyler, who had been in the system since he was 6, told the reporter that the wooden truck I'd made him was the first present anyone ever made just for me. I knew Marcus would see the coverage. Everyone in town was talking about it. But the real moment of truth came when David called me 3 days before Christmas. "Harold, you need to know what happened at Marcus's office Christmas party." "What happened?" "They were showing the news story about your toy drive on the big screen in the conference room. When your interview came on, someone in the crowd said, 'Hey, Marcus, isn't that your dad?' And Marcus just froze." David paused, and I could hear him choosing his words carefully. "Harold, everyone in that room was talking about how amazing your project was, how lucky Marcus was to have such an incredible father." And Marcus couldn't say anything. He just stood there while his colleagues praised you. What did he do? He left, just walked out of the party without saying a word. But here's the important part: his boss followed him. They had a conversation in the parking lot, and Marcus broke down. He admitted that he'd made a terrible mistake, that he'd let his wife convince him to cut you out of their lives, and that he'd been lying about the reasons why. My hands were shaking as I held the phone. His boss told him he needed to fix the situation, that a man who could inspire an entire community the way you have was not the kind of father you abandon. He said Marcus was lucky to have you, and that he was a fool if he didn't realize it. David, what does this mean? It means that Marcus is finally ready to admit he was wrong. But he's terrified that too much time has passed, that too much damage has been done. He's afraid you'll reject him the way he rejected you. That would never happen. I know that, Harold. You know that. But Marcus doesn't know that. He's been living with the guilt and shame of what he did for 2 years, and he's convinced himself that you must hate him. That night, I sat in my workshop surrounded by the tools and wood scraps that had become my therapy, and thought about forgiveness. I thought about Emma's face pressed against that window, about Lucas hiding behind the couch, about the grandson and granddaughter who had been stolen from me by adult pride and social ambition. I thought about Marcus as a little boy climbing into my lap to hear bedtime stories, learning to use tools in this same workshop, proud to introduce me to his teachers and friends as my dad, the electrician. And I realized that despite everything, despite the pain and humiliation and heartbreak, I had never stopped loving my son. I had never stopped hoping for the chance to hold my grandchildren again. But I also realized that any reconciliation would have to happen on different terms than before. I was no longer the same man who had been dismissed and discarded that Christmas morning. I had discovered my own worth, my own strength, my own ability to create meaning and joy in the world. If Marcus wanted me back in his life, it would be because he truly understood my value, not because he felt sorry for me or guilty about what he'd done. 3 days later, on Christmas Eve, I got my answer. I was in the church basement putting finishing touches on the last few toys when Mrs. Chen came downstairs with tears in her eyes. "Harold, there's someone upstairs who needs to talk to you." I knew before she said another word. I could feel it in the way she was looking at me with the kind of gentle sympathy you offer someone who's about to face a moment that will change everything. I walked up those stairs not knowing whether I was about to experience the greatest joy or the deepest disappointment of my life. Marcus was standing in the church vestibule, and he looked terrible. Older, thinner, with the kind of exhaustion that comes from months of sleepless nights and internal struggle. But most shocking of all, Emma and Lucas were with him. Emma was now 10 years old, no longer the chubby-cheeked little girl I remembered. But her eyes were the same, and when she saw me, they filled with recognition and something that looked like relief. "Grandpa Harold," she whispered, as if she were afraid I might disappear if she spoke too loudly. Lucas, now 7, hung back behind his father's legs, uncertain but curious. And Marcus, my son, who had declared me no longer family, looked at me with eyes full of shame and desperate hope. "Dad," he said, his voice breaking on the word. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Standing in that church vestibule on Christmas Eve, looking at my son and grandchildren, for the first time in 2 years, I felt everything at once. Joy, pain, anger, love, hope, and heartbreak all crashed together in my chest like competing storms. Emma took a tentative step toward me, her eyes never leaving my face. "Grandpa Harold, we saw you on TV. Daddy said you were helping kids who don't have families." "That's right, sweetheart." "Are you still mad at us?" The question nearly broke me. "Oh, Emma." I was never mad at you. Not ever." That was all she needed. She ran to me, throwing her arms around my waist with the fierce intensity of a child who had been denied something precious for too long. Lucas followed more cautiously, but when I knelt down to Emma's level, he came close enough for me to include him in the embrace. Over their heads, I looked at Marcus. He was crying openly now, not caring who might see. "Dad, I don't even know where to start." "Start with why you're here," I said gently. "Because I've been the worst son in the world. Because I let Cynthia convince me that you were the problem, when the problem was my own shame about where I came from. Because I threw away the most important relationship in my life for the approval of people who never really mattered." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, looking more like the little boy I remembered than the cold stranger who had banished me from his home. "Because Emma has been asking about you every single day for 2 years, and I finally realized that keeping her from her grandfather wasn't protecting her, it was hurting her in ways I was too selfish to see." I looked down at Emma, who was still clinging to me like she was afraid I might vanish. "Is that true, sweetheart? You've been thinking about me?" She nodded vigorously. "Every day. I kept the dollhouse you made me hidden in my closet. Mommy said I couldn't play with it, but I never let her throw it away." "What dollhouse?" I asked, confused. Marcus looked ashamed. "Dad, we kept all the gifts you brought that day. Cynthia wanted to throw them away, but I couldn't do it. They've been in our attic for 2 years. Along with the pocket watch. Especially the pocket watch. Dad, I know what that meant to you. I know it was your father's, and I know you were passing it down to me, the same way he passed it to you. Throwing away that gift was like throwing away 3 generations of our family history." I stood up, keeping one hand on Emma's shoulder and extending the other toward Lucas, who was warming up to me gradually. "Marcus, why now? What changed?" "Everything changed. Dad, my marriage is falling apart. Cynthia's control and manipulation didn't stop with you. She spent 2 years isolating me from everyone and everything that mattered to me. My old friends, my colleagues, even my children. She monitors my phone calls, criticizes every decision I make, and has turned our house into a place where nobody can relax or be themselves." He paused, struggling with emotions he'd clearly been suppressing for months. But the breaking point was watching Emma struggle. She's been acting out at school, asking her teachers about grandfathers, getting upset when other kids talk about their extended families. Her counselor said she's grieving a relationship she doesn't understand losing. Her counselor. "Emma's been in therapy for 6 months, Dad. She's been having nightmares, anxiety attacks, problems focusing in school. And when the therapist asked her what she missed most about her life, she said, 'My grandpa who made me toys and told me stories about Daddy when he was little.'" I felt tears starting in my own eyes. Oh, Emma. The therapist said that cutting a child off from a loving grandparent without clear justification was a form of emotional abuse. She said Emma needed to understand why her grandfather had disappeared, or the loss would affect her ability to trust relationships for the rest of her life. Marcus looked at me directly for the first time since we'd started talking. "So I told her the truth, Dad. I told her that Grandpa Harold didn't disappear. I told her that Daddy made a terrible mistake and sent you away, but that you had never stopped loving her." "What did she say?" "She said she wanted to see you right away. She said she had 2 years of hugs to give you, and that she wanted to show you how much she'd grown." Emma tugged on my shirt. "Grandpa Harold, I learned to ride a bike and I can read chapter books now, and I'm learning to play piano. I have so much to show you." "I'd love to see all of it, sweetheart." Marcus continued, his voice getting stronger. "But it wasn't just Emma. Lucas has been asking questions too. He's 7 now, old enough to remember you, but young enough that he's been confused about why Grandpa Harold stopped coming to see him. I looked down at Lucas, who had moved close enough to lean against my leg. "Hi, Grandpa," he said quietly. "I still have the wooden car you made me. I play with it every day." "I'm so glad, buddy." Marcus took a deep breath. "Dad, I need you to know that I'm leaving Cynthia. The divorce papers were filed last week. I'm fighting for custody of the kids, and I'm moving back to town so they can be close to their grandfather again." I was stunned. "Marcus, are you sure that's what you want?" "Dad, for 2 years I've watched you build a life filled with purpose and meaning while I've been trapped in a marriage that was slowly killing my soul. You've helped hundreds of children, earned the respect of an entire community, and created something beautiful out of the worst moment of your life." He gestured toward the basement where my workshop was still set up. "Meanwhile, I've been living in a house where my own children are afraid to laugh too loudly because it might disturb their mother's idea of perfection. I've been working at a job where my colleagues think I'm a heartless man who abandoned his own father. I've been pretending to be someone I'm not, and I've been miserable every single day. Son, I never wanted you to be miserable. I know that now, Dad. I know that everything you ever did was motivated by love, even when I was too blind to see it. I know that the values you tried to teach me about family loyalty and treating people with dignity were exactly the values I should have been passing on to my children." Emma looked up at me. "Grandpa Harold, are you going to come to our new house? Daddy said we're going to have a workshop where you can make toys and a big backyard where we can play and Sunday dinners like we used to have." I looked at Marcus questioningly. "If you'll have us back, Dad. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I hurt you in ways that might be impossible to repair. But I'm hoping that maybe if I spend the rest of my life proving how sorry I am, you might find a way to let me be your son again." I was quiet for a long moment, looking at this broken family that had somehow found their way back to me. I thought about the journey I'd been on, the strength I'd discovered, the life I'd built from the ashes of my old one. "Marcus, I need you to understand something. I'm not the same man I was 2 years ago. I won't go back to being someone who accepts being taken for granted or treated as less than valuable." "I understand, Dad. I have a life now, a purpose, commitments to my community and the children I work with. Any relationship we rebuild has to respect those priorities. I wouldn't want it any other way. And most importantly, this reconciliation isn't about you feeling guilty or me being lonely. It's about what's best for Emma and Lucas and what's best for all of us as a family moving forward." Marcus nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Dad, all I want is the chance to be a son you can be proud of again. All I want is for my children to know their grandfather and to learn from him the things I forgot how to teach them." I looked down at Emma and Lucas, these precious children who had been stolen from me by adult stupidity and pride, who had somehow managed to hold on to their love for me despite everything. "Well then," I said, opening my arms to include Marcus in our family hug, "I guess we'd better start figuring out how to be a family again." As we stood there in that church vestibule, holding each other and crying healing tears, I realized that sometimes the greatest gift isn't getting back what you lost, but discovering that what you've built in its absence has made you strong enough to handle getting it back. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be custody battles, difficult conversations with Cynthia, and the complex work of rebuilding trust and redefining relationships. But for the first time in 2 years, I felt complete. My name is Harold Williams. I'm 60 years old now. I'm a grandfather, a community volunteer, a successful businessman, And most importantly, I'm a man who learned that sometimes you have to lose everything to find out who you really are. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, becoming who you're meant to be is exactly what brings your family back home. If you've experienced family alienation or struggle with setting healthy boundaries with loved ones, I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. How did you navigate the balance between unconditional love and self-respect? Don't forget to hit that like button if this story reminded you to value the people who truly matter. Subscribe for more real-life stories about family forgiveness and finding strength in the darkest moments, and share this with someone who needs to remember that it's never too late for healing and redemption. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I hope your own family finds their way back to what matters most. May your holidays be filled with the kind of love that survives every test and comes back stronger.